Welcome to another episode of Appalachian Shine. This is your host, JC Schweingrouber. Thanks again for tuning in. We have a great show today. On this episode, we have a very special guest, George Ella Lyon, who is a poet laureate of Kentucky, and she has over 50 books available out there, which is mind blowing that anybody could write that much. But yet she has, and she is here with us today. So, George Ella, thanks again for stopping by and talking with us here today on the podcast.
Oh, I'm glad to be here.
You actually have a really interesting history. You're from Harlan, Kentucky, and being a poet laureate, I want to definitely want to get into that here in just a minute. But you got started in Harlan, Kentucky, and I read a really interesting article online from some years ago, and this was on the WYMT, that you got started writing when you were in third grade. Is that right?
I did. My daddy, who worked as a dry cleaner, loved poetry and he loved music, and he read poems out loud sometimes. Not poems for kids, just poems. And I thought that was I just loved it. I loved the sound. I loved the emotion. I might not have understood the poem, but I was captivated by the music. And I just thought, well, that's magic. And so when I was in about third grade, nine or 10, I had this experience and it was just so big. And I didn't know, the feeling I had was so big, I didn't know what to do with it. And I thought, I don't even know if I thought poem. I just sat down and started writing. And I had the best time. And I still have the best time writing. It's a deep challenge and a deep pleasure.
And it's sometimes I guess a lot of people have a hard time reading poetry because it's so personal. But I read one of your poems, and there was I guess a critique and a breakdown of that particular poem where I'm from, and it was so much in there about there's so much about poetry and just the not other than just rhyme and meter, but there's so many other styles and elements and things that you can put into poetry to make them so unique. And at what point did you get so interested in poetry that you really started to like master this craft and use so many different techniques in your work?
Well, I had a wonderful teacher in high school who became a dear friend for the rest of my life. She was a creative writing teacher and a poet. Her name was Kathleen Hill Sterling. And I would take her my poems. We went to the same church, and I would bring her poems. And every month or 6 weeks or so, she would invite me out to her house and talk to me about my poems. I mean, how lucky can a person be? So I grew as a writer from that. And then when I got to college, I found a professor there who got me to work on the literary magazine, and soon we had a creative writing class which I got to take, and I just, when I went to college, what I really wanted to do, I didn't want to go to college. I wanted to go to Greenwich Village and sing with Joan Baez and Bob Dylan. That was my plan, because I was writing songs too, and starting when I was 14, and I was in a couple of little groups that performed. So that's what I wanted to do. But my parents, oddly enough, didn't think that was such a hot idea. So they said if I would go to college in Kentucky for a year, then if I still wanted to do that, we'd talk about it. But what happened was that in that first year, I just fell in love with where I was and all I was learning. And I gradually realized that as much as I love singing and music, that it was the music in the words that calls me the most. And so that set my course. I didn't dream I would go on to write fiction children's books and, all the other things I've written. Poetry was what I was focused on and what, the door I came in.
Yeah,
And
and
it's still pretty much my route wide poetry.
the fact that you had over 50 books available on Kindle and paperback on Amazon was just, like I said, was mind blowing. That to put that much content out and over a lifetime. I know a lot of people always say, "Hey, I want to write one book," and that's kind of on their bucket list. But writing is a passion. It seems like the music of your poetry is just so captivating, especially the one from 1993, where I'm from. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about that because um, the article I read on WYMT from this was, I think, right after you were named Poet Laureate of Kentucky. Um, you said people often ask, "Where are you from?" It says here, it's a simple question, but if you ask George Ella Lyon, her answer is not straightforward. I think of it as a little bit like tuning in a radio station. Lyon said, you just keep moving the dial until it's clear, but then it may not be the station you want, so you have to keep going. I thought that was a very poetic answer in and of itself. Can you talk a little bit about that and like how, like why you would answer that and being from Harlan and just because there's so much mystique in the mountains, I sort of kind of understand, but like from your point of view, what was that?
Well, I write by ear. It's voices that fascinate me. The voices I grew up with, um, the voices in my family, and then the voices of characters you know, when they come to me, voices of teachers. Um, I write by ear partly because I had double vision as a kid, so seeing was problematic. So I became a listener, and I think that was a gift out of a difficulty, you know, uh, because I do pay attention to what people say. And one of the exercises I sometimes give is go somewhere like a fast food place and sit down in a booth a booth that's next to where somebody else is sitting and eavesdrop. See if you can write down the way they speak.
Oh yeah.
You're not, yeah, don't eavesdrop on people that could get you in trouble. But just try to get a voice, you know, to try to make it come alive on paper. I heard a guy in a Hardee's. There were these guys who were eating, these older gentlemen, and one of them said, "Do you have any siblings?" And the other one said, "Well, I had 5, but the good ones are all dead." Well, now there's a story.
Yeah.
I don't know what it was, but that's a pretty great opening line. So the thing about the radio station is sometimes when I have a novel called With a Hammer for My Heart, a novel for adults. It's all in different voices, and it's set in a fictionalized Harlan. So when I was listening for those voices, sometimes I would realize, oh, this isn't Mama talking, this is me. I've got the wrong station. I've gotten into my voice and I'm not hearing her voice. I'm making her speak for me, and that's not what I want to do. So, you know how hard it can be in the mountains sometimes to tune your radio because because of the mountains. And or back in the days of the days of rabbit ear. Well, pretty soon we got cable, but trying to get a TV signal. You don't remember that, you're too young, but I remember before television. That's in the television in the mountains. I remember before television in the mountains. But anyway, so that metaphor just came to me naturally of tuning and trying to hear past the interference. And in writing too, there's always interference. You get interrupted. You have jobs. Somebody dies. Somebody gets born. The dishwasher catches on fire. I mean, anything, you know, you get interrupted and you have to come back to and try to tune in again to your writing self and keep in contact with that writing self so that so that it's not such a long way back when the time comes that you can write again.
So when you were young and first started writing in Harlan, and you got into poetry, I'm kind of curious as to what inspired you to kind of pursue that more. You talked about your being read poetry and the music, but did you discover reading it that you had a favorite poet that
Gosh,
you
yes.
inspired you?
Yeah, when I was in sixth grade, um, I remember it was Thanksgiving time because Carolyn Knuckles and I were drawing with colored chalk. We were drawing turkeys on the board. And when it was time for us to go back to our seats, I looked at we had a literature book, and we never talked about poetry in school. I don't know if the teachers were scared of it or what, but we never did. But I always read what was in the book. And I came to this poem by Gerard Manley Hopkins called Spring and Fall to a Young Child. And I read it, and I told Carolyn, I might not be here tomorrow. I think I'm getting sick because I was so cold and then hot. And I just felt so weird. And but then I wasn't sick. And when I came back the next day, I read that poem again. And that was it. It was the poem. It was the poem, which is about a little girl who is crying because the leaves are falling off the trees. And she doesn't know that they'll be back. The
Yeah.
fall just makes her sad. And it starts out, Margaret, are you grieving over Golden Grove unleaving? Leaves like the things of man, you with your fresh thoughts care for. Can you? And it goes on at the end. It is the plight man was born for. It is Margaret you mourn for. So you've had this premonition of everything dies. I mean, you've had this example that everything dies, and she's a little girl, and she can't say that to herself any more than I could explain what the poem meant, but I felt it. And so I just, I know it doesn't sound very pleasant thinking you're getting the flu when you read a poem, but I just knew that was alive. There was a power to that, a charge, and it was important. And so I have gone on to read and study Hopkins all my life. I just noticed this morning that my collection is falling apart.
Maybe it's time to get another one, right? Replace it. I've had some books where I've read so many times I've had to replace those too.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but so let's kind of like jump a little bit forward to was this 2015, 2016 timeframe, and you were named Kentucky Poet Laureate. What is the process to get in? I know there's probably a committee that decides, a certain number of artists and poets that can be accepted for that. But what's the process, and what was that like winning that?
Well, people nominate. Anybody can nominate someone for Poet Laureate. And there's a form to go, that you go through, you can get from the Arts Council website. And then those nominations have work samples, CVs, everything to recommend, because you're getting a job. You're not going to get paid, but you're getting a job. And so then there's the current Poets Laureate, review all of those along with a couple of other people, and make 3 recommendations. And those go to the board of the Arts Council. And then their recommendation goes to the governor. So the poets laureate don't choose the person, but we do review the nominees uh and send them on to send the three uh onto the board. So um which is kind of an awesome responsibility, you know. Um and you and we're all waiting to hear how it turns out. I When I got the letter, uh, usually they call you, but for some reason I got a letter and from the governor, and I said, there must be some mistake. I just couldn't believe it. You know, it just was, it's just overwhelming.
It's an
Uh,
awesome honor.
and well, it is, and I just had no idea that such a thing could happen, and so it was a great, it was a great 2 years uh, that I served, and I was all over the state and uh, did all kinds of workshops. And my project was a Where I'm From project, was to reach out to libraries and teachers and throughout the state and offer them the materials to do a Where I'm From workshop, and then collect the poems from all as many counties as we could and put them on the website. There's a map of Kentucky. You click on your county or whatever county, and the poems come up. The Where I'm From poems come up
Wow.
from that county. It's still there. And the first time I clicked on Harlan County and they came up, I burst into tears. I mean, I dreamed this up, but I didn't realize they would. I mean, I didn't think they'd really do it. And when they said, sure, we can do that, uh, there were poems from prison, there were poems from uh, retirement homes, there were poems by eighth graders, and uh, poems by veterans, and there were poetry exhibits and readings and things in different places. It was magnificent what happened out of it.
Yeah, and you said this went global. You were getting poems from around the
Oh,
world.
yeah, but that was happening long before I was poet laureate. That just started up. I don't know. I wrote it in 93. I did the first workshop in 94, and then teachers took it. And teachers started sending me their students' poems. And then the internet really got going. And a guy named Fred First, who's in Virginia, I believe, or maybe North Carolina, but he made the template. I don't know if you saw the template where you can just fill in the blanks.
I
Uh,
didn't see it, but I know where to get it. Actually, I found it. So
yeah. So for a lot of, that was helpful. I've never taught it that way, um, but because it's just a list, that's all it is. I am from, I am from, I'm from.
yeah,
It's not intimidating. People think they can't write a poem, but they know they can make a list. And because it's about them, we've all got stories and experiences and songs and uh, memories, images from where we're from, um, and place names and what grows and the river and the street names and what your nicknames and what people said to you. And in my poem, it says, I'm from the know-it-alls and the pass-it-ons, from perk up and pipe down, both of which were said to me. But it's interesting that it says I'm from the pass-it-ons because it's sure been passed on.
yeah. It's a beautiful work of art. Let me kind of jump a little bit to like now. I was looking at your website. You have a really interesting website. I know you mentioned you were going to be updating it. But there's a really great section there about your story and where you went to college and your music as well, because you play guitar and some of your experiences at college with activism, things like that, schools and library visits. Do you still do workshops for writers?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And talks. I'm working on a keynote right now for a conference here, a Books in Progress conference. And I was just before we talked, I was looking at an email from uh, a teacher in Eastern Kentucky who wants me to come do a day in her school and then maybe do a talk to parents in the evening, which I do.
Well, that'd be great. If anybody's interested in following this, it's the website is georgeellalyon.com. And this website is great. Actually, this is one of the most helpful getting to know someone websites, um, and what you do in your activism, your history, and workshops. This is really good stuff. What kind of changes are you going to be making to the page?
I want to make it more. I want to make it more where I'm from, focused at the very beginning because people are looking for that, and because that's what if I'm known for anything, that's what it is, and because sometimes the poem is handed out with somebody else's name on it because things just get confused, so I want to kind of affirm that I wrote it too. But let me tell you something else. My poem began with a poem by Jo Carson, who was an East Tennessee poet. She's passed on now, but she was a very dear friend and mentor, sister of mine, really. And Jo was an actor too, and a playwright, and she listened for voices. And she has a book called Stories I Ain't Told Nobody Yet. And all the pieces in it, she calls them people pieces. She doesn't call them poems. They are things she heard somebody say, or she heard the heart of them.
Yeah,
Somebody
okay.
said. So they came from voices. They came from people in Johnson City, in and around, the Johnson City, Kingsport area, Joe's territory. And so one of her people pieces, and I guess it's on my website, where on the Where I'm From page, but is a woman who wasn't born there, who moved there, but she loves it, and it's for her, it's home. And she says, "The mountain I see every morning is my mother. Can
Oh,
I pledge allegiance?" But when people hear her accent, they say, "You're not from here, are you?" And she resents that because it's, she feels she belongs and she feels like she's being pushed aside. And so she says, I'm from the bed I out of every morning. I'm from people who don't have roots like trees. I think there's 6 lines like that in this poem. And so when I read it, I thought, well, I'm from people who do have roots like trees. And I want to write one. I want to write one just using that, just those I'm from. And so I sat down and began to work on it. And it was different from anything I'd ever written because I didn't try to finish it. I just kept adding lines and lines. And this went on for about 3 weeks of me putting more lines. And then I edited it and I put the ones that seemed to go together, and I got rid of the rest of them. And so it was and I had so much fun doing it. I thought, well, maybe other people would like this too. So that's how it all got started.
well, that's a great credit to her. That's a beautiful story, and it sounds like a great friendship.
Yes, yes. And when I talked to her about it, because I didn't want to, I wanted to make sure she felt okay. And she said, look, I've put things that have come right out of your mouth into characters' mouths in my stories. So, and I read because I had said one time, my prayer is, Lord, don't let me fall in love today. And it turned out to be in a story she wrote.
Now you've
Uh,
written you've also written plays. I noticed on
mhm.
your website. How hard is it to transition from writing a play to or writing poems to writing things like plays and other books? I mean, longer books. That's a tough stretch. I
Well,
mean, it's hard for people to write across genres, as you know, much less changing entire styles and strategies.
my poems were getting longer, and they were getting more narrative, and because I've got all these stories, and so a friend of mine, a professor and women's studies teacher and actor herself, director, um, she was doing a monologue workshop, and I asked if I could sit in on it, and she said sure. Um, and I started writing these monologues. The first one was my grandmother, a voice of my grandmother, who at that time was nearing the end of her life, and she wouldn't accept any help at home. She wouldn't accept the home health. Uh, and it was getting difficult for her and for my parents too. But so she was the first voice I wrote. And then I thought, well, Papa probably wants to talk too. So then I wrote something for Papa. And then, well, my daddy, their son, had things to say. And pretty soon I had all these monologues. And Anne, my friend, said, you're writing a play. I said, I don't know how to write a play. She said, just keep going and then we'll figure that out. So I just kept going, and she got a grant to produce this. It turned out to be called Braids. She got a grant to produce it before I was even finished with it. And then yeah, that was a bit of a.
That's not pressure.
But she showed me how the monologues could be braided together so that there could be scenes, because they're all talking about each other,
Yeah.
So and so that was the first one. And then the second one, I didn't mean to write a play then either. My husband, who's a musician and a writer, Steve Lyon, suggested that we collaborate on something besides kids and laundry. So I said, well, that sounds good to me. And he said, so you write poems and I'll set them to music, and we'll get our friend Barbara Hall, who was a music professor and an incredible contralto voice. She will sing it. So it'll be a song cycle. So she will perform it. And so we contacted her, and she said, yes, she'd love to. And we got a grant. All God's children have to have a grant, So we got a grant, and so the first poem I wrote, I wrote this poem called Archaeology. I didn't know it was going to have anything to do with this project, but it starts out, I'm digging with a soft brush, a pen, for the site of my founding city. Mothers, fathers, I'm listening. Where the dirt flakes from the dish chip, for a song my great, 100 greats grandmother sang, way up the chromosome chain. So I gave this to Steve, and Steve says, oh, this is the beginning of our project. I said, you think so? He said, yeah. So he wrote music for it. Well, when I heard the music, I was like, oh my God, I've got to do what this poem says. I've got to listen way up the chromosome chain for the song my great grandmother sang.
Wow.
And so, I mean, give yourself an assignment. and so I thought, okay, I will, so I will write poems. I will listen and I'll write these poems, and then there'll be songs, and then Barbara will sing them. However, she had a lot to say. And so the first thing I wrote was like 14 pages long.
Oh wow.
In her voice. Yeah. And it was not a poem. And And the fact was, it was a Civil War story. I knew very little about their story. I didn't even know what side they were on. Uh, but I had heard little bits that my great great grandfather was a soldier and in the hospital, which was in a cave at Cumberland Gap, and that she came to take care of him from wherever she lived, but he died.
Wow.
And she brought his body home. That's all I knew. And I'd only got little pieces of that. I make it sound more like a story than what I got because I got it over many years. Well, so anyway, I began to write poems that would be songs in there. And then, because all these coincidences happened, all of these things. Well, for instance, it started with the poem archaeology, and I happened to notice in the library that the call number for archaeology in the Dewey Decimal System is our house number.
That's
Now,
ironic. Yeah.
yeah, and we live in the streets around us are Appomattox and Fredericksburg and Vicksburg and all those Civil War battles. And but our street is named after the couple who owned the farm. And of course, I was writing about the couple who owned the farm. But it got stranger than that. It turned out I got her pension application from the National Archives, and things I thought I had made up in that 14 pages turned out to be true.
Wow.
Yeah. And so it just went on like that. So finally, I mean, I had to write myself into the play because I was, it became about me too. And so we wound up performing it, me and Barbara, and Steve wrote the music, but sometimes Steve had to come on as a soldier too. So anyway, that's how that happened. I mean,
That's
this is how
incredible.
things, yeah, yeah. And we called it, or I called it, Looking Back for Words. And only at the very end did I realize we abbreviated it LBFW, but my great great grandmother's initials were LBF.
Wow. It's just almost
So
like
it
that
was
was
just,
just meant to be. It was just,
I know. And we did it. We performed it at a reenactment, Civil War reenactment, on the field where he was mustered in, because he came up from Tennessee to join the Union in Kentucky. And he came up with all of his people in the farm surrounding his. They came and their county tried, when Tennessee seceded from the Union, they tried to secede from Tennessee. So they couldn't do that. So they came in and joined the Union in Kentucky. So we're performing on that field. It's night, there are horses, there are campfires. There's nothing anywhere that looks like now. And when I say his name, Addington Bruton, First Sergeant Company B, I realized that the last time his name was called in that field, he was there.
and then here, all these generations later, you're doing it again.
I'm there doing it. And
That's
until we didn't know he was forgotten. I mean, he was just this little, and she too, who came and Esther was her name. She who came and took care of him and raised the children on her own. And, we didn't know their story. And so there we were. I felt like I had been called to go there and do that.
yeah, indeed you have. That's incredible. It's like it was just waiting there for that time and place. for you to show up and tell the story. And it was just
I
waiting on me.
know.
And that's incredible. That
Yeah.
really is.
Yeah.
I,
That kind of thing happens.
yeah, I'm glad it does. I wanted to ask you now, you're working on some newer stuff. Do you want to share some of your work with us? Read something for the listeners?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Um, let me, this is the binder with the manuscript I'm working on right now. And
Okay.
it's called New Way After Daddy's Dry Cleaners. So, so here's one of the story poems that
Okay.
has it's called Hairpin. Once, when the car stopped working just like that, somewhere on 25E, my mother coasted to a stop beside the road, pulled the release handle, got out, and lifted the hood. She leaned over the engine as if it were a brooder full of chicks, then took a bobby pin from somewhere in her hair and put it where something told her it should go. Back in, she turned the key. At first, it sounded like the engine wouldn't turn over, but then it caught. She drove the 30 miles or so home and went straight to the Texaco. Frank Gurgley came out to meet us. What can I do for you, Gladys? I'm not sure, she said. Could you check the engine? It quit on me around Artemis. Pop the hood, he said, then went to look in. In a few minutes, he came back to her window. Well, for starters, you've got a hairpin in the carburetor.
That's funny.
Yeah.
It's it's amazing how like creativity just sort of once you catch that bug, it never leaves. There's no retiring from what you do. You know,
Um,
I've met Appalachian writers that are in their 90s that are still writing, and it is incredible. It's amazing how, and I'll just say this, here to kind of wrap things up, how the inspiration from just your life in Harlan and the just an Appalachian life spun and grew into so many great things and so many great stories, poems, and inspired so many people that have with with what you've done. So congratulations on just a lot of great work. I look forward to more of it. So
awesome.
I hope you'll come back and share more with us.
I would love to.
One thing and I'll say this for the future episode, but I would love to pick your brain on like growing up in Harlan in the 60s and part of the 50s there. And then when you judge poetry today, I know it's sort of hard to judge, and I don't want to put people in a box, but times have changed so much. And you hear it a lot in music, just the changes and styles. But sometimes you sort of wonder where the heart and soul of a lot of music is these days, and I do. And not that what I grew up on was any great shakes, but I still go back and listen to old 20s big band jazz, so I listen to a lot of stuff. But I'm curious as to how poetry has changed and your view how literature has changed over the years from the stuff that you read when you were young and classics to stuff that were written during your era and then stuff written today that's just maybe I don't know, just seems like cultures clash. And I'd love to pick your brain on that sometime just to see what you think of the growth of poetry and just art in general. So yeah,
I'd be. Um,
it's not often you find somebody that's experienced enough and experienced so much of it that you could get a good take on it, because a lot of writers that I've met didn't come to writing till later in life and didn't really what I mean, because you seems like you pay attention to a lot because you're listening, like you said, you're always listening, and that's so a lot of us just don't hear the music even if we write. That makes sense.
well, could I go out with it with another poem?
Absolutely, love to.
This is a poem I wrote after Joe died, Joe Carson. So it's called After the Wake. For Josephine Katrin Carson, my sister, were the same as. Now that you have crossed that river, now that we have sung you to the other side, have taken leave of your service and feast, your ashes, your house. Now that it is all behind us and you far beyond us, what do we have but your words planted in the bygone dirt of your days, which are still by dog climbing the trellis of this unparalleled, yes, I know, moment, and blooming like the Dickens and the Welty bloom against the always turning pages of the sky. Oh, Joe, I am trying to say the unsayable again because, after all, it's my rich and unpaid job. Same one you showed up for at the door of every blessed day. Lift the lid on the brain pot, stir up the heart fire, and see what's cooking. I realize I've traipsed in from garden to kitchen, word-wise, but so did you, bear following close. Unceasingly at your wake, that old black dog searched for you, among mourners eating cheese dip in your kitchen, dining, living, dying room, playing ukuleles and stand-up bass by the fire pit in your yard, talking and singing their hearts out. Bear beseeched each guest to be you, or failing that, to bring you, or failing that, to take her somehow to you. She could not rest. We had each other, distraction, consolation, spirit drinking and conjuring. No one wanted to leave and take your absence with them. But we did, Joe, saying goodbye to your dying in that red spread bed, in that cinder block nest with your Day of the Dead walker, foursquare in the corner, with your walking stick, mage's staff collection hung like the rungs of the ladder on the wall. Now I want to make a poetic finish, saying how at last your ever-reaching spirit has climbed another ladder, breathless to the next world. But you say, that's bullshit, George. It's pretty, and pretty ain't what it took to get out of my body, out of that house, to let go all that held me. Say what I said. We are by design supposed to let go the hard stuff and live in love.
That's beautiful. That's a great
So
poem.
that gives you a sense of her.
Yeah, that does.
Just,
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for being here.
so,
Folks, if you get an opportunity, well, when you take an opportunity, go visit georgeellalyon.com. You can find her books on there. I assume they can buy them on your website.
no, any independent bookstore can order it if they go to bookshop.org if you're doing it online, because you can
Okay.
let your purchase benefit any independent bookstore you want.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Yes, it's a great alternative to being eaten alive by the ogre of Amazon.
Yeah, definitely. And anybody, I'd always tell this, shop local. If you find independent bookstores, go in there and give them some business. I love these shops just to walk in and smell the old pages. There's one in Johnson City, Tennessee that I go to sometimes, and it's just I can hang around there all day. So definitely definitely make sure you check out her website, pick up her books, enjoy her poems, and write your own where you're from. I love that. I'm gonna write my own where I'm from,
Okay.
and
Send it up.
I'll share it with you if you like. Okay.
I would like.
Hey, thanks for stopping by. We certainly appreciate it, and hopefully you'll come back again, and we'll talk a little bit more in depth about just where you see the arts have traveled over the years, especially poetry and in our region, and hopefully we see another generation of great poets in the next 20, 30, 40 years. Be great.
I think they're out there now.
They are, and
Yeah.
once somebody's going to write where I'm from and their own where I'm from, and then they're going to get started just like that. So, hey, thanks again, George Ella Lyon, and thanks again for tuning in to another episode of Appalachian Shine. We'll be back with another episode soon. Until then, we'll see you down the road.